Chapter 1191. On top of that, the energy contained within the ice god's heart is of the extremely pure ice attribute. Among the tidal Douluo who perished for it, aside from those who died during battle, 3 of them were frozen to death as soon as they came into contact with it. Hence, no one knows how to use it, nor how to utilize its power. However, we'd like to present a bold hypothesis that if a 4th Godslayer missile were to appear in this world, this would be the best core material for it, period. The entire auction house immediately erupted into chatter upon hearing this. The fearsome power of a Godslayer missile had already been verified, as exemplified by the fact that the entirety of Shrek City had been razed to the ground by 2 of those missiles. Even all of the powerful beings of Shrek Academy and the Tang sect were unable to nullify the fearsome might of the explosion, and that was sufficient testament to just how terrifying those Godslayer missiles were. As such, the fact that this was being proclaimed to be the potential core for another Godslayer missile made it an extremely attractive item. All of the people who had come to participate in this auction were important figures from major powers. They were extremely powerful beings themselves, or represented a prominent force. Everyone knew what it entailed for them to get their hands on another Godslayer missile. That would be an extremely effective trump card. Kyangu Dongfang listened to the auctioneer's vehement introduction with a cold smile on his face. If it weren't for the fact that the true owner of the Heaven Do auction house was someone whom he didn't want to offend for no good reason, there would have been no need for him to participate in this auction to secure the ice god's heart. Furthermore, he was already aware of some secrets that the auctioneer definitely couldn't reveal. In reality, this ice god's heart had already undergone countless hours of research by the military and the federal government, and the auctioneer was correct in proclaiming that it was powerful enough to be the core for a Godslayer missile. However, that was actually impossible to put into practice. This was because not only was it constantly releasing ultra-low temperatures, it refused to interact with any other types of energy, which meant that the energy it contained couldn't be drawn upon by any solar tools or solar rays. If it weren't for that pitfall, there was no way that this ice god's heart would appear in an auction house. Of course, Kyangu Dongfang was determined to secure it naturally because he knew how to truly use it. With that in mind, he glanced at Yuna, and a faint smile appeared on his face. The auctioneer was finally reaching the closing stages of his introduction. Whether this ice god's heart could truly be used was still up for debate, but one thing was for sure, it was most definitely a divine grade ice attribute item. Alright, let the bidding begin. The starting price will be 5 billion federal credits, and each bid must be an increment of at least 100 million federal credits. This was undoubtedly an astronomical price, and it had been a very long time since a lofty auction price had appeared in the Federation. Furthermore, no one could be sure whether this ice god's heart really was a divine item. If it really were a divine item, then there was no way that it would be auctioned. The auction house was essentially attracting all of the major powers here to make a gamble that they would figure out a way to use the ice god's heart, regardless of whether it was in constructing a Godslayer missile or for some other alternative purpose. As long as this item could be used, then its value would far surpass its starting price. You may begin bidding now, the auctioneer said with a smile. However, he was greeted by complete silence. No one made a bid, but everyone's eyes were firmly fixed on the ice god's heart. 5 billion federal credits was not a small number, and it wouldn't be that easy to issue such a large sum all at once, even for many major powers. However, the auctioneer remained completely unflustered. It was never an easy task to sell such an outrageously extravagant auction item. This starting price wasn't actually all that high when one considered the immense amount of energy contained within the ice god's heart, so even if it were to be passed up by everyone, that wouldn't be an issue. After all, there was no instruction from the higher ups stating that this item had to be sold. Only after 3 full minutes had passed did he issue another reminder. You may begin bidding now. 5 billion. Someone finally made a bid, and it was a man sitting in a dark corner to the left of the auction. Alright, we have a bid of 5 billion. The auctioneer immediately responded to this opening bid. 5 billion 100 million. Another bid was quickly made. The main appeal in the ice god's heart lay in its potential. Kyangu Dongfang wasn't the only one here who was aware that the military hadn't managed to find a purpose for the ice god's heart. In fact, many of the people present were aware of this, but they still wanted to research it. After all, the ice god's heart was a divine item, and if a method of usage were to be found for it, even hundreds of billions of federal credits wouldn't be too expensive a price to pay for it. Kyangu Dongfang didn't immediately join in on the bidding. Instead, he merely looked on as everyone else placed bids. Such an expensive auction item was naturally beyond the budget of many people, and only a very small proportion of people present were able to participate in the bidding. There were currently 4 bidders competing against one another, and the price quickly climbed past 6 billion federal credits. This wasn't a very high price considering the amount of energy that was contained within the ice god's heart. However, the fact that there was no clear way to use the item made the bidders rather hesitant. The auctioneer repeated the bids while constantly introducing more and more appealing features about the ice god's heart, even going as far as to say that it would never rot or decay. A faint smile appeared on Kyangu Dongfang's face. It wasn't like this was a coffin, so what if it would never rot or decay? Yuna remained completely expressionless as if this ice god's heart had nothing to do with her, but in reality, Kyangu Dongfang had only come to the auction house today as she had told him that with the ice god's heart at her disposal, she would be able to make a breakthrough to the spirit domain realm in a short time. Her martial soul was elemental control, so spiritual power was more important to her than to any other soul master. It could even be said that her spiritual power would determine the rate at which her cultivation rank progressed. Even though she was Heavenly Phoenix Douluo Len Yaoshu's disciple, she had passed the backup spirit envoy trial with flying colors, which made her an extremely bright and important prospect in Kyangu Dongfang's eyes. She was far too young. She was only 21 years old, yet she was already an 8-ring soul Douluo. She was definitely the future of the spirit pagoda. Even more importantly, the spirit pagoda had only attained its current level status due to a piece of research that Yuna had presented. Around a month ago, her contributions had prompted Kyangu Dongfang to make an exception for her despite widespread opposition, promoting her to one of the 4 spirit pagoda spirit envoys despite the fact that she wasn't even a title Douluo yet. Thus, she also became the youngest spirit envoy in the history of the spirit pagoda. Kyangu Dongfang had asked her what type of reward she wanted. Her research had been extremely important to the spirit pagoda, and he was naturally very eager to please such an incredible young talent. Furthermore, Kyangu Dongfang was also hoping that she would be able to take her research a step further. If she could do that, then he would definitely be one step closer to achieving his ultimate goal. Once he achieved this, not only would he take over control of the Douluo continent, he firmly believed that even the Star Luo continent and Doe Spirit continent would fall under the control of the spirit pagoda, even if no wars were instigated. As such, he would be able to control the entire Douluo star, which was why he held Yuna in such high regard. In his eyes, she was truly a blessing from the heavens. Yuna had initially refrained from asking for any rewards, and her attention had only been drawn to the ice god's heart after Kyangu Dongfang had told her that it would be an auction item here. Even though she had only taken a glance at the image of the item, Yuna had told Kyangu Dongfang with great conviction that if she were to get her hand on the ice god's heart, her spiritual power would quickly reach the spirit domain realm, and that she would become a title Douluo within a year. Chapter 1192. Kyangu Dongfang was naturally ecstatic to hear this, and he immediately traveled to Heaven Do City with Yuna. On top of that, there was a selfish element involved in his eagerness to nurture Yuna despite the high costs. Among the 4 current spirit envoys of the spirit pagoda, the second youngest one was Kyangu's Hangting. It was his grandson. He was 31 years of age and a title Douluo, and it could be said that he was the most exceptional talent to have emerged from the Kyangu family for a long time. He was also being groomed by Kyangu Dongfang as his eventual successor. Many years had passed since the Kyangu's family first rose to prominence, and during this time, the family had completely monopolized the spirit pagoda, and the so-called election system was just there for show to create an illusion of fairness. Kyangu's Hangting was Kyangu Dongfang's eldest grandson, and he was truly outstanding, displaying exceptional aptitude from a very young age. Back when he was 28 years old, he progressed to the title Douluo stage and was instantly promoted to become one of the 4 spirit pagoda spirit envoys. During these past 3 years, Kyangu's Hangting had been focusing wholeheartedly on his cultivation and was yet to marry. However, it was love at first sight for him the first time he had met Yuna, who had been 18 at the time. Kyangu Dongfang was naturally eager to play the matchmaker, but Len Yaoshu turned him down, citing Yuna's young age as an issue. Now that Yuna had been promoted to become a spirit envoy, she stood at the pinnacle of the younger generation regardless of whether it came to status, ability, aptitude, or looks, and in Kyangu Dongfang's eyes, she was the ideal bride for his grandson. Kyangu's Hangting had only recently come out of seclusion, and during the past 3 years, he had progressed to rank 94 in soul power. He was only one step away from becoming a hyper Douluo, and he also had the unreserved support of the spirit pagoda behind him. He was currently pursuing Yuna with all his might, hoping to secure her hand in marriage, and Kyangu Dongfang was certainly more than willing to give him a hand. Hence, he came to the auction house with Yuna and was determined to purchase the ice god's heart for her at all costs. If Gu Yuna could also reach the title Douluo level in the near future, then she and his grandson would be a match made in heaven, and they would also be the pillars that supported the entire spirit pagoda in the future. Whenever Kyangu Dongfang thought of his grand scheme, he was struck by an indescribable sense of excitement. At his level of power, wealth was no longer important. His only objective was to attain more influence and widespread jurisdictive power. What he wanted to see the most was for the younger generation to be able to continue to take the Kyangu family to greater heights. 6,800,000,000 going once, 6,800,000,000 going twice. The auctioneer was practically yelling at the top of his lungs at this point. The auction for this ice god's heart wasn't progressing as well as he would have hoped. The instruction from his higher-ups was to try and sell it for 10 billion federal credits. But who would have thought that the auction goers would display so little interest in the item? 7 billion. Right at this moment, another bid was made, and the auctioneer felt as if he had been saved. Kyangu Dongfang lifted his number one paddle and gave the auctioneer a nod. The entire auction house fell completely silent. All of the auction goers were wearing masks, but it was quite clear to everyone just how important someone had to be to have secured the number one paddle. 7 billion going once. The auctioneer commenced his countdown again while vehemently selling the allure of the ice god's heart, but no one took the bait. Ahem. Kyangu Dongfang suddenly cleared his throat at this moment, and it was only a quiet noise as far as everyone else was concerned, but it sounded like a deafening thunderclap in the ears of the auctioneer. He felt as if his blood were churning in his veins, and he was naturally quite stunned by this. As the main auctioneer of the Heaven Do City auction house, he was also a powerful soul master in his own right, but he felt as if his soul had almost been scattered by that gentle clear of the throat. 7 billion going twice, 7 billion going thrice. Slam. He brought down his hammer to seal the deal. Nothing was more important than his own survival, and there really wasn't anyone else making further bids anyway. Congratulations, guest number one. The ice god's heart is all yours. Kyangu Dongfang smiled as he turned toward Gu Yuna and said, Naya, once we get back, Yao Shu and I will assist you so you can progress to the spirit domain realm as quickly as possible. Thank you, Chairman. Gu Yuna nodded in response. Kyangu Dongfang also gave her a benevolent nod, but what he actually wanted was for her to call him grandfather. The dazzling ice god's heart was delivered to Kyangu Dongfang and Gu Yuna, and its container had undoubtedly been custom made to be able to withstand the ultra-low temperatures of the ice god's heart. Gu Yuna's eyes glazed over slightly as she looked at the ice god's heart, and that same familiar figure appeared in her mind again. At this moment, the person that Gu Yuna was thinking of also just happened to be holding a crystal that was just as spectacular as the ice god's heart, but wasn't cold in the slightest. It was none other than the vast sea cosmic crystal. Yue's Hengyu had gone back to rest. He had expended a lot of energy and also sustained some injuries from using the holy fusion technique, so he needed some time to rest and recuperate. Thus, Tang Wuling also returned to his own room, and prior to going into a meditative state, he suddenly recalled the vast sea cosmic crystal that Elder Long had proclaimed to be the Academy's most precious treasure. It was referred to as a divine item, so it was definitely something that was quite extraordinary. But how was he supposed to use it? Was it really just to be sensed by the powerful beings? Tang Wuling could still clearly recall that he had been drawn into a boundless sea when he had first set his eyes on this crystal. That was truly a wonderful feeling, and it had left him feeling completely reinvigorated and refreshed. However, he had been staring at the vast sea cosmic crystal for quite a while now, but he was unable to enter that profound state again. So just what kind of secrets would it contain? With that in mind, Tang Wuling attempted to inject his soul power slowly into the vast sea cosmic crystal in the hope that this would achieve something. As his soul power was slowly injected into the vast sea cosmic crystal, it really did begin to display a reaction. A layer of blue light was released by the crystal, making it appear even more dazzling and glorious. However, there was no other reaction aside from that, even when Tang Wuling increased his soul power output. Was this not the right way to approach things? Right at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded within his mind. Vast cosmic shroud? The voice was quite familiar, and it gave Tang Wuling quite a fright. Old Tang. Tang Wuling called out internally. Indeed, the voice came from none other than Old Tang, and he seemed to be rather surprised. The last time he had seen Old Tang was when he had been taught Fury of the Masses. It was this spear technique that had officially guided Tang Wuling onto the right path of spear usage, thereby allowing him to invent path of regal domination and all or nothing, as well as to attain a spear soul. Old Tang had told him that he could call for him after he mastered Fury of the Masses, but with everything that had happened, he hadn't yet had a chance to call Old Tang. To put it more accurately, he had simply been improving far too quickly, to the extent that he was too busy juggling his own abilities and had forgotten about calling Old Tang. Are you talking about this vast sea cosmic crystal? Tang Wuling asked. Why had Old Tang referred to it as the vast sea cosmic shroud? A hint of excitement suddenly crept into Old Tang's voice as he urged, press it against your forehead, quick. Tang Wuling had never seen Old Tang this excited and urgent before, and he had absolute trust in Old Tang, so he immediately pressed the vast sea cosmic crystal to his own forehead. The crystal was cool to the touch, and he didn't feel anything in the instant that he pressed to his forehead. Just as Tang Wuling was wondering if the vast sea cosmic crystal would take him into that mystical marine world again, something began to happen. Chapter 1193. Tang Wuling suddenly felt a scorching sensation well up in his mind, and everything around him turned into a golden color. Immediately thereafter, the vast sea cosmic crystal abruptly adhered itself to his labella, as if it had been glued there. His spiritual power had already reached the spirit domain realm, and his enormous spiritual power was like a boundless ocean. But at this moment, he was struck by the feeling that there were boundless spiritual fluctuations surging through his mind. Due to the fact that he was holding the vast sea cosmic crystal against his forehead, he could clearly sense that it was shrinking. Much to his alarm, the crystal quickly shrank down to the size of a fingernail, and only then did it stop shrinking. Furthermore, Tang Wuling discovered that not only was he unable to move his own body, everything about him had congealed with the exception of his mind. However, he could sense ripples proliferating outward from his body, and those ripples all seemed to be spreading into the distance. The vast sea cosmic crystal seemed to be the origin of these ripples, and unbeknownst to him, the golden symbol had appeared on his forehead. The symbol was of the shape of a golden trident, and the minimized vast sea cosmic crystal was situated right under the sharp tip of the trident's central spike, as if it were the core of the entire symbol. Golden light was still revolving around and rising up from the golden trident, but Tang Wuling was unable to do anything. His soul power and spiritual power were both being depleted at an astonishing rate, but elements of all different attributes were also rapidly surging toward him to replenish what he had lost. In the beginning, it wasn't too pronounced, but as time passed, these elements began to converge at a faster and faster rate, making Tang Wuling feel as if he were back in the blood god array. He didn't know what was happening, but a peculiar balance had appeared within his body, and he seemed to have become a statue. Energy was constantly being injected into his body before being released as these strange ripples. Was Old Tang doing all this? Could it be that Old Tang was capable of controlling his body? Tang Wuling's heart tightened as this thought occurred to him. Old Tang had always been so mysterious to him. It was Old Tang who had made him aware of the existence of his golden dragon king seals, and it was also these abilities that had made him who he was today. However, Old Tang was suddenly controlling his body now. How could he not be concerned? The cycle of influx and release of energy continued, and he couldn't do anything about it. After this brief period of concern, Tang Wuling gradually relaxed. It wasn't like overthinking things would help him here anyway. Even if Old Tang really did possess the ability to control his body, he couldn't do anything about it now. Furthermore, during these years of interaction with Old Tang, he had never done anything to his detriment, so it would be unfair to suspect him now. With that in mind, Tang Wuling began to immerse himself in sensing the changes in the elemental particles around him. He began to observe every type of element to experience their complexity. This was the way to cultivate spiritual power after reaching the spirit domain realm, and seeing as he couldn't do anything else, he may as well take this opportunity to cultivate his own spiritual power. Time passed by slowly, and after an indeterminate period of time, Tang Wuling suddenly felt his scalp tighten, following which all of his hair suddenly stood up on end. It was also in this instant that the ripples proliferating from his body suddenly stopped, and immediately thereafter, Tang Wuling felt his own mind tremor violently, as if something were being injected into it from the outside. This was not a good feeling, and he was immediately struck by an excruciating headache that made him feel as if his spiritual world were about to explode. However, this feeling only persisted for an instant before it disappeared, and he was gasping for breath as he relaxed his tense-up body. However, at the same time, he was quite stunned by the events that had just unfolded. What had just happened? There were no longer any ripples spreading from his body, but Tang Wuling could sense that something seemed to have forged a connection with his mind. This was a very abstract sensation, but at the same time, he was sure that it existed. I need to hibernate for some time. Look after yourself. I'll explain everything once I reawaken. Old Tang's voice finally sounded again, and he seemed to be very exhausted. However, his weariness was also tinged with a hint of excitement. I'll leave another spear technique in your mind for you to cultivate. After that, old Tang's voice faded, and Tang Wuling finally regained control over his own body. He immediately inspected himself internally to try and sense old Tang's existence, but it was as if he had completely vanished and hadn't left behind any trace of his aura. However, as he inspected his own internal condition, Tang Wuling was stunned to discover that his spiritual power had received another major boost that was several times more significant than the improvements he had made during the past 3 months. He was even able to clearly see every single cell within his own body, and he hurriedly raised his hand toward a vast sea cosmic crystal on his forehead, only to find that there was nothing there. He hurriedly rushed into the bathroom to look into the mirror, and sure enough, there was nothing but skin on his glabella. It was as if nothing had ever happened. What? A wry smile appeared on Tang Wuling's face. What was going on? All had just entrusted him with the vast sea cosmic crystal, the most precious treasure of Shrek Academy, yet he had immediately gone and eaten it. He really was a dubious sea god's pavilion master. No, to put it more accurately, it had been eaten by old Tang. How was he going to explain this to All and to everyone else from Shrek Academy? After experiencing so many things in his life, Tang Wuling had already developed an extremely high level of mental fortitude, and after a brief period of uneasiness, he gradually calmed down. It was clearly beyond his current ability to recover the vast sea cosmic crystal, but this wasn't the first time that something had entered his glabella. The seed of life had also taken refuge there in the past, but it had still emerged in the end. All he could do now was wait until old Tang reawakened before asking him about what had happened. All most likely wouldn't just randomly ask him about where the vast sea cosmic crystal was for no good reason, and even if she did ask, he would just have to tell the truth and say that it had fused into his glabella. With that in mind, Tang Wuling shook his head in a resigned manner before deciding to cultivate first. His spiritual power had suddenly received an inexplicable boost, so he needed some time to acclimate himself to it. He sat down with his legs crossed and entered a meditative state, and his mysterious heaven method soul power began to circulate through his body of its own accord. His soul power was like a pure white liquid that was tinged with a layer of golden light. He had already completed the first preparation step of the body sex congenital secret method, and he was currently in the process of consolidation. He wasn't in a hurry at all to move on to the next step. He had already coexisted for so many years with the golden dragon king seals, and he knew how important it was to constantly bolster his own body. With every large improvement he made, he had to take some time to consolidate and adjust to his new powers. If he couldn't control his own newfound powers, then many problems could arise that could prove to be detrimental to his cultivation. Tang Wuling quickly entered a completely immersive state of meditation, and his consciousness receded into his body while also experiencing the changes taking place in the air around him. Elemental particles of all different elements were within his sensory scope, and following that improvement in spiritual power, he was able to sense them with even greater clarity than before. He tried to control them, to dissect them, and to experience them on a deeper, more minute level. As he entered this special immersive state, his mind suddenly stirred, and he could sense that something seemed to be calling out to him. There seemed to be an extremely distant voice that was gently calling out his name over and over again, and even though the voice was quite indistinct, he could clearly sense an extremely profound closeness toward that voice. He abruptly opened his eyes as he was jerked out of his meditative state, and he was surprised to find that his clothes were plastered to his body by sweat. It was incredible that he could sweat such a large amount at his current level of power. That voice was Chapter 1194. All of a sudden, an extremely powerful emotion welled up in his heart. Father, mother. As soon as the words escaped from his mouth, a strong sense of longing washed over him, and his chest tightened as he was struck by a sense of asphyxiation. Under the pressures exerted on him by the Tang sect and Shrek Academy, Tang Wuling had constantly been growing and developing, but another mission that was just as important to him was to find his parents. The joy of seeing all of these members of Shrek Academy rising from the dead had made him forget about this all-important task, and only after hearing those voices that had suddenly appeared in his spiritual world was he suddenly reminded of this. He still had to search for his own parents. He gently pressed his left hand onto the ground and sprang to his feet. As soon as this thought sprang into his mind, he was struck by a rush of irrepressible emotions. He raised his wrist and dialed a number on his soul communicator as his breathing began to accelerate, and only after the soul communicator had rung for a long while was the call connected. Wuling. A familiar and slightly jaded voice sounded from the other end of the line. Tang Wuling hurriedly replied in an urgent voice. It's me, Teacher Mang Tian. How are you? That's right. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to none other than Mang Tian, the 6th rank blacksmith, and Tang Wuling's first forging teacher. Even after so many years, he was still a 6th rank blacksmith and hadn't managed to progress to the Saint blacksmith level. Tang Wuling had constantly been in contact with him, giving him a call every once in a while to check on him, as well as to ask if there had been any news about his parents. That question was always greeted by a disappointing answer. I'm all right. What's going on with you? You sound like you're really emotional about something. Aren't you currently in the military? Mang Tian asked in a slightly puzzled manner. Due to the confidential nature of the Blood God Legion, Tang Wuling had only told Mang Tian that he had joined the military without revealing any specific details. Tang Wuling replied, I left the Legion a while ago to complete some missions. Is there any news about my parents? Mang Tian was silent for a moment before replying. Unfortunately not. Over 10 years had passed, yet there had still been no news about his parents. Tang Wuling felt as if his heart were being stabbed by countless needles, and that feeling had only become more pronounced after he had heard the voices of his parents in his mind. Why haven't my parents contacted me even after all this time? Where are they? I miss them so much. Didn't they say I can go to find them when I become a 7-ring soul sage? I've reached that level now, but I don't even know where they are. Tang Wuling was overwhelmed by his emotions, and his voice began to tremble with sobs. What? You're already a soul sage? Mang Tian's voice was filled with shock and incredulity. After all, Tang Wuling was only 21 years old. Surely a 21-year-old soul sage was considered to be quite extraordinary even in Shrek Academy. However, at the same time, he was also aware that Tang Wuling was one of Shrek's 7 monsters, so he didn't doubt this claim and was immediately filled with elation by this news. Yes, I became a soul sage in the military, but what use is that? I still can't. Mang Tian suddenly cut him off here and interjected, Wuling, listen to me. Tang Wuling faltered slightly before shuddering as if he had been struck by a bolt of lightning. Teacher Mang Tian, could it be? Mang Tian sighed, seeing as you're already a soul sage, I can tell you everything now. I'm sorry, I've been lying to you this entire time, but your father insisted that I did so, and I could only comply. He has actually contacted me already. What? Tang Wuling's voice instantly spiked up a few octaves, and it was also trembling slightly. This was the first time he had heard any news about his father in over 10 years. Teacher Mang Tian, I don't blame you for this. Just tell me where they are. Tang Wuling's hand was trembling so badly that he was almost unable to hold on to his soul communicator. Mang Tian replied, you have to calm down first. Your father told me not to reveal his current situation to you exactly because he's worried that you'd let your emotions get the better of you. What I can tell you first and foremost is that they're both alive and well, and they're not in any danger. Tang Wuling heaved a faint sigh of relief upon hearing this. After calming himself down a little, his intelligence also returned, and he immediately deduced, have they had their freedom restricted somehow? That's right. It's not safe for your father to contact anyone by a soul communicator, but he still takes the risk to call me every once in a while to hear about how you've been. In reality, every time he calls me, I give you a call soon after, and I tell him about your situation during every one of our conversations. He was very happy to hear that you made it into Shrek Academy, and he became more intent on keeping this a secret from you as he was afraid that knowing the truth would negatively impact you. They wanted you to flourish in Shrek Academy, so don't blame them for hiding the truth. They were simply doing everything with your best interests in mind. I know you've had a very hard time these past years, but they've also had their fair share of struggles. They miss you very, very much, just like you miss them. A hint of emotion had clearly crept into Mang Tian's voice as he spoke. Tang Wuling asked, where are they right now? Mang Tian replied, they're currently in a research facility, and even they aren't aware of the exact location of this facility. The only thing they can be sure of is that the research facility has something to do with the spirit pagoda. This is why your father told me to keep this a secret from you this entire time. The Spirit Pagoda is the most powerful organization on this continent, and their research involves extremely dangerous weapons. Hence, they were taken to the Dou Spirit continent and are no longer on the Douluo continent. The only thing your father knows is that they were taken to a city with a very high altitude before they were locked into this research facility. The Dou Spirit continent. Tang Wulin's brows furrowed tightly upon hearing this. Never did he think that his parents would be on another continent altogether, and that the Spirit Pagoda would have played a role behind their disappearance. Tang Wulin didn't have a very good impression of the Spirit Pagoda to begin with, and he reflexively clenched his fists after hearing what Mang Tian had to say. At the same time, it seemed that the heavens were on his side. He was going to travel to the Dou Spirit continent and Douluo continent in 3 months. Don't do anything rash, Wulin. You may already be a soul sage, but how can you contend with the Spirit Pagoda on your own? Your father called me about a month ago and told me that their research would be complete after another year at most. The Spirit Pagoda promised to send them back after that. Send them back? Not only was Tang Wulin not excited to hear this, a chill ran down his spine instead. In the past, he would have been extremely elated to hear this, but after learning about the relationship between the Spirit Pagoda and the Eagle faction, as well as the fact that the Spirit Pagoda was very likely one of the masterminds behind the Shrek Academy bombing, he no longer harbored any expectations toward the Spirit Pagoda. What couldn't the Spirit Pagoda do to keep their secret new research a secret? Furthermore, his parents had been secretly abducted anyway, so what better way was there to ensure confidentiality than to make them disappear off the face of this world? With that in mind, Tang Wulin became extremely anxious. Teacher Mang Tian, when my father calls you again, please tell him to slow down the completion of his research no matter what. Also, give him my number and tell him to find a way to speak to me. In 3 months, the higher-ups of the Tang sect will be visiting the Dou Spirit Empire, and I'll be going with them. I already have a certain level of status in the Tang sect, and I'll implore the seniors of the Tang sect to save them. Chapter 1195. He hadn't told Mang Tian that he was now the Tang sect master, as that was simply far too far-fetched. However, mentioning the fact that he had the support of the Tang sect naturally made Mang Tian feel a lot more reassured. Wulin, are you concerned that the Spirit Pagoda will? But they're the #1 organization on the continent. Surely they wouldn't. Tang Wulin chuckled coldly. I don't have a trace of trust in my heart for them anymore. If they had any sense of responsibility that the #1 organization on the continent should have, then they wouldn't have abducted my parents. All right, if your father calls me again, I'll relay this message to him. You make sure to look after yourself as well. You should know that your parents want you to be safe more than anything else. By the way, how's Naya doing? Your father was really happy to hear that you had found her last time. Tang Wulin's heart throbbed with pain at the mention of Naya. He still hadn't figured out what the relationship between Douluo and Naya was. After a brief hesitation, Tang Wulin decided to hide the truth. Naya is doing quite well. After ending the call, Tang Wulin was unable to calm himself down anymore. He had finally received news about his parents, and at the very least, they were still alive. However, at the same time, his resentment for the Spirit Pagoda had spiked even further. He couldn't keep waiting like this. He had to go and save his parents no matter what. However, it would not be an easy task to save them. The main issue was that he had next to no leads. As for the Spirit Pagoda, Tang Wulin actually wasn't too worried about it as he was confident in his own abilities. Furthermore, he had so many companions by his side as well. The Spirit Pagoda was most powerful here in the Douluo continent, so it would definitely be weaker on the Dou Spirit continent. What he had to do now was conduct research so that he would be able to find his parents on the Dou Spirit continent. Currently, his only lead was that they were situated in a city that was at a very high altitude. Tang Wulin had no idea about the situation on the Dou Spirit continent, but thankfully, he had the assistance of the Tang sect. The Tang sect was a super organization that spanned all 3 continents, so it would definitely have information pertaining to the Dou Spirit continent. A sleepless night passed, and Tang Wulin went to find Zhang Xin early the next morning before informing him of the situation his parents were currently in. After hearing Tang Wulin's story, Zhang Xin contemplated the issue momentarily before replying. The Dou Spirit continent is the smallest of the 3 continents, and its terrain is very uneven. There are around 3 cities with high altitudes, 2 of which are rural cities. The largest of those 3 cities is Spirit Wave City, which is situated beside Heaven Dou City. The Dou Spirit continent's capital city is also known as Heaven Dou City. There just so happens to be an important branch of the Spirit Pagoda there, so that would be my best guess. Tang Wulin was ecstatic to hear this. With Zhang Xin's guidance, he had a far greater sense of direction. He may not be able to find his parents there, but at the very least, he now had some direction and wouldn't be running around like a headless chicken. After receiving this reliable information, Tang Wulin calmed down again, and thinking back to the strange dream he had last night, he couldn't help but feel that the dream had been extremely realistic. Could it be that after his spiritual power reached a certain level, he was now able to sense his parents? It would be great if that were the case, as that would undoubtedly make it much easier for him to track down his parents. Perhaps he would be able to sense their exact location when he focused his attention. Thus, he eagerly entered a meditative state and focused all of his attention to try and recapture that same voice, but it failed to appear to him. Had it really been just an illusion? In his exhausted state, Tang Wulin had no choice but to enter a normal state of meditation. His consciousness began to fade, and he felt as if his entire body were immersed within all types of elements. He was being nurtured by them, and as he sensed the changes they brought to his body, he was constantly improving. It had to be said that possessing tremendous spiritual power really was a fantastic asset when it came to cultivation. Through the use of his spiritual power, he was able to draw upon more natural energies, thereby allowing him to cultivate at an extremely fast rate. He didn't have to worry about his own physical tolerance, so if he were to continue to progress at this rate, it would take him a year at most to reach the soul Douluo level. My child. Wulin. The voice appeared again, and it was still just as faint and ethereal as ever, as if it had originated from another distant world. However, it really had appeared. Tang Wulin was almost instantly jerked out of his meditative state, and he shuddered, but didn't dare to open his eyes. Instead, he quickly focused his attention on that voice. However, when he tried to take the initiative to pursue that voice, it suddenly cut off and vanished without a trace. What? Tang Wulin opened his eyes with a frustrated look on his face. He had clearly just heard the voice, so why had it suddenly disappeared? Could it be that he could only hear this voice in an unconscious state? He decided to try again, but now that something was on his mind, he found it quite difficult to enter a meditative state. After a long while, he finally managed to re-enter that state, and when he reopened, it was already the next morning, but the voice hadn't appeared to him again. Was it because he didn't possess enough spiritual power? Was that why the voice was so faint and out of reach? There was no way that he could ascertain his parents' location from this. He sought out Light Dark Douluo Long Yeyu and raised this question to her. In terms of cultivation experience, there was most likely no one on this entire continent who could match her. After hearing Tang Wulin's recount of events, Long Yeyu's brows furrowed slightly as she replied, "It's very unlikely that the voice came from your parents. As you said before, both of your parents are normal people, and normal people have very limited spiritual power, so there's no way they can contact you on a spiritual level. It's indeed true that a human experiences significant changes once their spiritual power reaches the spirit domain realm, and one of the potential changes could be spiritual resonance under certain sets of special circumstances. This means that if you use your spiritual power to call out to someone, there's a chance that they can sense your call if they're within a certain range. However, the possibility of that happening is extremely slim, and at the very least, you're far from being at a level where you can accomplish this. I've been at the spirit domain realm for over 100 years and attained a spiritual domain, yet even I can only just barely accomplish this within a very limited range. By the way, while we're on this topic, I'll give you some information about spirit domain realm spiritual power. I'm sure you haven't received much guidance in this area yet." Tang Wulin's eyes immediately lit up upon hearing this. Elder Long was like a walking wealth of information, and having her presence would surely prevent him from making many mistakes in his cultivation. Long Yeyu continued, "Perseverance is very precious in cultivation, but aptitude ultimately decides how far one goes. You have both in equal measure, which is why you were able to become what you are today. The spirit domain realm is different from all prior levels of spiritual power, and it can even be said to be a completely independent realm. Prior to reaching the spirit domain realm, improvements in one's spiritual power corresponds with their sensory range. The larger their sensory range, the more immense their spiritual power is. That's why there are devices that can measure how large your sensory range is. However, the spirit domain realm is different, as that's the stage where one's spiritual power attains a substantial form. It's exactly because of this that you're able to sense all of the elements around you and even draw upon them to unleash your own abilities and replenish yourself. The greatest thing about having spirit domain realm spiritual power is that through cultivation, one can develop their own spiritual domain, which is essentially like your very own small world. Your spirit is the ruler of this small world, and you can control everything inside it. You can even use it to attack, defend, enlightenment, control, and everything else you can think of. The formation of a spiritual domain is the foundation for one's progression to the demigod level, and it's a mandatory step that has to be taken before one can reach that level. Your spiritual power has already reached the spirit domain realm, but due to lack of guidance, you still haven't attained the spiritual domain. I want you to focus more of your efforts on this area in the next 3 months. The sooner you can attain your spirit domain, the more beneficial it will be for you. When that time comes, you'll discover that you can control many things that were previously beyond your control, and you'll also be able to control many things you can already control on a far more minute level. Chapter 1196. Tang Wuolin had naturally heard of a spiritual domain in the past, but he had never seen one before. This is what a spiritual domain feels like. Long Yeyu said as her eyes suddenly began to glow. In Tang Wuolin's eyes, he felt as if Long Yeyu's eyes had become a pair of dazzling stars that were almost too bright to look directly into. Immediately thereafter, everything around him seemed to have become a starry sky that he was situated in. The surrounding area was completely abstract and ethereal, and he could see everything, but it was all beyond his reach. In the next instant, he was struck by a strong sense of asphyxiation, as if he had suddenly been teleported into outer space, where there was a vacuum of both air and elemental particles. Tang Wuolin's bloodline fluctuations immediately became more powerful on their own, and a golden layer of dragon's repulse appeared around his body to alleviate his discomfort somewhat. But no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to detect any elemental particles in the surrounding area. Just as he was feeling stunned by this sudden development, the starry sky around him suddenly turned into a dreamlike rainbow world. All of the elements that had vanished earlier suddenly returned with a vengeance, and extremely rich bursts of elemental particles surged toward him from all directions. However, these elements didn't flow into his body. Instead, they all seemed to be filled with rage and repulsion toward him, and their objective seemed to be to drive him out of this world. The dragon's repulse around Tang Wuolin's body began to fluctuate violently, and his body also began to sway. If it weren't for his immensely powerful physical constitution, he felt as if he would have been torn to shred by these elements already. In the next instant, all of the elements of different colors quickly converged to form a tornado, and the only elements that remained were of the light and darkness attributes. Elder Long appeared at what seemed like the edge of the heavens with light and darkness elements revolving around her, creating a terrifying storm of light and darkness. This feeling of something being able to destroy the entire world was something that Tang Wuolin had only felt in the face of those Godslayer missiles. During this entire process, he was completely powerless. His immense spiritual power was completely unable to control the outside world, and it couldn't even take him out of this world. Roar. Tang Wuolin couldn't help but let loose a thunderous dragon's roar that was filled with powerful dragon's might, but the storm of light and darkness continued to ravage the dragon's might around him, resulting in a very painful experience. Was this the power of a limit Douluo? This was just the pressure from her spiritual power alone. Back when he had unleashed that all-or-nothing attack against Elder Long, he had been aware that she had intentionally displayed signs of weakness to elevate his status, but he had still been rather pleased with himself. Only now did he truly realize just how colossal of a gap there was between him and a limit Douluo. If Elder Long wanted to kill him, it truly wouldn't be much more difficult to her than killing an ant. He still had a very, very long way to go in his cultivation. In the next instant, all of the light faded, and Long Yeyu was still standing in front of him. They were still in Elder Long's room, and it was as if nothing had happened, but it also felt as if an eternity had passed by. That was a spiritual domain? Tang Wuolin appraised Long Yeyu with a stunned expression. Long Yeyu nodded in response. Did you feel that? In your spiritual domain, you are the ultimate ruler who can rule over everything. As long as your opponent possesses inferior spiritual power to yours, and especially if they don't have a spiritual domain themselves, their powers will be severely debilitated by your spiritual domain. A spiritual domain has always been associated with limit Douluo, and even among hyper Douluo, there are very few who have managed to attain one. On the Douluo continent, there are currently no more than 10 beings who possess spiritual domains, and once you reach this level, it basically means that you will be sure to become a limit Douluo in the future, and you'll get there extremely quickly. Most soul masters only get to this level after they become limit Douluo, but you've bucked that trend. You've been blessed by the plane, and your spiritual power is growing far faster than that of the normal person, which means that your spiritual power far exceeds your cultivation rank. The plane has bestowed upon you everything you need to succeed, so you better not disappoint it. You have to attain a spiritual domain as quickly as possible, and when you reach that level, it'll be immensely beneficial to your cultivation. With your current foundation and rate of cultivation, if you can attain a spiritual domain, you'll definitely become a limit Douluo before you turn 35. You could very likely become the youngest limit Douluo in the past 1,000 years. Tang Wuolin's eyes lit up with motivation as he took a deep breath, and said, I understand. How should I cultivate my spiritual domain, Elder Long? Long Yeyu replied, everyone's spiritual domain is different, and never have there been two identical spiritual domains, so the cultivation process involved to attain it will also be different for everyone. What I can tell you is that you must assess yourself. Your body is a domain, and you possess everything within that domain. When you can reflect this from a physical to a spiritual level, you'll attain your spiritual domain. Tang Wuolin's brows furrowed tightly upon hearing this, and he had no idea how he was supposed to accomplish this. There's nothing else for me to teach you in this regard. It took me 17 years to attain my spiritual domain, yet Yanbing only took 12 years. It's different for everyone. There have even been seniors before us who attained their spiritual domains in the instant they became limit Douluos. You can call it luck or a moment of sudden enlightenment, but whatever the case may be, this is something that no one can teach, so you can only rely on yourself. Assess yourself to the best of your abilities. Everyone's body is a treasure trove, even more so for soul masters like us. You've been blessed by the plane and you possess the golden dragon king bloodline, so your body holds more mysteries than anyone else. When you reflect all of this onto a spiritual level, I'm sure you'll attain an extremely powerful spiritual domain. Even I'm very much looking forward to seeing it. Thank you for your guidance, Elder Long. It appeared that a spiritual domain wasn't something that could be attained purely through hard work. Long Yeyu's words echoed in Tang Wuolin's mind as he returned to his room and continued to cultivate. How was he supposed to assess himself? The best way to begin would most likely be to engage in internal inspection. At the Spirit Pagoda headquarters, Gu Yuna was seated with her legs crossed in a silent chamber, and it was quite surprising to see her here as this silent chamber belonged to the chairman of the Spirit Pagoda, Kyanggyu Dongfeng. It was also the highest caliber silent chamber in the entire Spirit Pagoda headquarters, yet Kyanggyu Dongfeng has allowed her to use it. The reason that he had given her was that he wanted to provide her with the best environment to progress to the spirit domain realm using the Ice God's heart. Not far in front of Gu Yuna was the Ice God's heart that had been sealed in the custom-made box. It was shimmering with faint light, and it looked like the most beautiful gem, but those who were truly aware of what it was knew that if it were to appear in the outside world, everything would instantly be transformed into a land of snow and ice. Gu Yuna's eyes were closed, and her long hair draped down her shoulders, along her back, and pulled away down onto the ground. She seemed to have entered another plane, another world altogether. All of a sudden, a low yet pleasant dragon's roar echoed throughout the room, and the entire cultivation chamber dimmed as if her body had suddenly drawn away all of the light rays. In the next instant, specks of rainbow light began to appear around her. They emerged in a very rhythmic manner, arranging themselves evenly around her body before silently revolving around her. Chapter 1197. If Kyanggyu Dongfeng could see what was happening right now, he would definitely be stunned as Gu Yuna had already reached the spirit domain realm even without using the Ice God's heart. Furthermore, even as a limit Douluo, Kyanggyu Dongfeng had failed to detect this. The low dragon's roar gradually became louder and clearer, but Kyanggyu Dongfeng's silent chamber was virtually completely isolated from the outside world, so no energy fluctuations or sound would escape from it. As the dragon's roar rang out, and the rainbow elements in the air began to undergo a transformation, the elemental particles of the same colors began to converge, forming a series of miniature dragons that revolved joyfully around her body. There was a blue water elemental dragon, a red fire elemental dragon, an azure wind elemental dragon, a yellow earth elemental dragon, a black darkness elemental dragon, a silver spatial elemental dragon, and a golden light elemental dragon. The dragons circled around Gu Yuna's body, and right at this moment, she slowly opened her mouth and exhaled, expelling a burst of 9-colored breath. As soon as she exhaled, the surrounding elemental dragons suddenly froze on the spot, immediately following which the entire room turned silver in color. All of the elemental dragons also took on a dazzling platinum hue as they flew through the silver world, and Gu Yuna slowly opened her eyes. Her purple eyes were as clear as space, and the platinum dragons reflected in her eyes were like specks of starlight. A 9-colored crystal slowly emerged on her forehead, and an indescribable burst of light erupted from her body. All of the silver and platinum colors in the surrounding area were also basked in a faint layer of 9-colored light. Gu Yuna slowly rose up into the air before exhaling once again, and the light before suddenly turned into a silver light screen. The blurry image being depicted within the light screen slowly became clearer, and it was none other than that of Tang Wuolin, who was sitting with his legs crossed, attempting to search for the path that would lead to his attainment of a spiritual domain. The cold and regal look in Gu Yuna's eyes gradually warmed and softened, and a faint smile also appeared on her face. Big brother. After a long while, Tang Wuling still hadn't made any progress in his spiritual cultivation, and he no longer had the heart to cultivate anymore as he had received another call. Where did Zheng Yu go? Tang Wuling went to Yue Zhengyu's room, but he wasn't there. What an unreliable guy. So be it, I'll go on my own. That's right, they were back, and they had all returned together. Shrek's 7 monsters had finally been reunited. Yue Zhengyu had returned with the holy fusion technique and the fruits he had reaped from his second holy cleansing. What about everyone else? How much had they grown from their respective experiences? How was England's sword soul cultivation going? How were Yuan and Yui's fist techniques coming along? Tang Wuling had witnessed their powers during the Star Battlenet Inter-Federation competition, but he didn't know anything about the others. He really missed them. On this occasion, he didn't immediately rush out. Instead, he disguised himself into an ordinary-looking middle-aged man before departing from the underground Tang Sect headquarters, then headed straight for the Heaven Dou Seoul train station. There was still around half an hour left until his friends were due to arrive, and the train station was as lively and bustling as ever. Ever since the destruction of Shrek City, Heaven Dou City had become an even more important hub, and this was technically the main city of the Dou faction, so the reconstruction process had gone very well. The city had also been armed with far more soldiers than before, and the military faction that supported the Dou faction had given the city an extremely high level of security measures. Tang Wuling arrived at the exit of the station and stood at a discreet corner. It was really good to be able to reunite with everyone. Everyone had grown significantly during their military training stints, including himself, and in the next 3 months, he was going to complete everyone's suits of 3-word battle armor. After that, all of them were going to travel to the other 2 continents. At the thought of the Douluo Empire, Tang Wuling couldn't help but think of Long Yue and the former princess of the Douluo Empire. Daiyuna and Long Yue had left in the end. After being rejected by Tang Wuling during the Sea God Fate matchmaking convention, Daiyuna had returned to the Douluo Empire with a broken heart while Tang Wuling had set off for his demonic island military training. As Daiyuna's guardian, Long Yue had no choice but to go back with her. Shumia and Long Yue became a couple during the Sea God Fate matchmaking convention, but she didn't leave with him. She couldn't bear to leave Shrek Academy behind, and she wasn't going to sever her ties with the academy because of a man. Following the bombing, the two of them had fallen out of touch. In order to keep it a secret that there were survivors from Shrek Academy's inner court, Shumia hadn't contacted Long Yue this entire time, and she was the one who had told him about all of this. Now that they were about to head to the Douluo Empire soon, they were definitely going to meet Long Yue and Daiyuna again. Thinking back to everything that had happened in the past, Tang Wuling felt as if it had all been a dream. Even now, it still seemed extremely unrealistic that Shrek Academy had actually been destroyed. The Dragon Valley small world was mostly no longer accessible. Tang Wuling looked down at his rainbow bracelet. He had spent 3 years in the Dragon Valley, and even though there weren't any living dragons there, he could still clearly sense that his bond with the Dragon clan had strengthened significantly during his time there. It appeared that he had delayed his cultivation significantly by burying dragon skeletons for 1,000 days, but that experience allowed him to attain true peace of mind, which then led to his current achievements. All of them had been buried, so they should be able to rest in peace now. Just as these thoughts were running through Tang Wuling's mind, he suddenly sensed something and reflexively raised his head to cast his gaze toward the station exit. The first thing that he was greeted by was the sight of a bulging stomach, followed by a portly and familiar figure. Compared to in the past, he was even fatter, but also taller and broader. His height had even surpassed Tang Wuling's by a little, so it was quite clear that he had been very well fed during the time they had been apart. He still wore a harmless smile on his face, and what was quite surprising to Tang Wuling was that he couldn't sense any soul power within his body. How you managed to completely subdue his essence? This was something that even Yue Zhenyu couldn't do. Tang Wuling could clearly sense an overflowing holy aura from Yue Zhenyu, yet there was no aura nor any soul power fluctuations being released by this portly figure at all. Directly following this portly figure was a young beauty. She still wore her usual cold expression, but she was just as beautiful as ever. Tang Wuling couldn't help but think back to the first time they had met. At the time, she had been a proud and overbearing representative of Shrek Academy with powerful sword techniques. At the time, Tang Wuling had been very envious of her, envious that she was a member of Shrek Academy and envious of her powers. Since then, she had become one of his closest friends, and it was truly a great feeling to see them again. Tang Wuling made his way directly toward them, and with his masterful disguise techniques, even his closest friends wouldn't be able to recognize him. Furthermore, with his spirit domain realm spiritual power, it was an extremely simple task for him to hide his own aura. He walked directly toward the portly figure before bumping straight into his body. Hey, look out! The portly figure raised a hand and pressed it against his shoulder. The hand was wide and warm like a soft cushion, but at the same time, it was like an immovable mountain. If this were a normal person, then they would have undoubtedly been brushed aside with ease. But the portly figure could feel a sudden burst of enormous power erupt from the middle-aged man's shoulder. He felt as if he had pressed his hand against an awakening giant dragon, which was now crashing directly toward his chest. The cold beauty behind him was slightly alarmed by this before a smile immediately appeared on her face. Her gorgeous looks were already attracting a lot of attention, and her smile was like a spring breeze melting through winter snow, instantly rooting many onlookers to the spot. Thump! Tang Wuling's shoulder crashed into the portly figure's chest, which was very soft and cushioned. The portly figure's flaps trembled as they absorbed the impact, and he raised both of his hands to grab Tang Wuling's shoulder. However, right at this moment, Tang Wuling had already spread open his arms and did his best to encircle them around the enormous waist before him. Huh? Boss? No matter how slow Shu Lizzie was to catch on, he had naturally already identified Tang Wuling at this point. Why aren't you two in disguise? Tang Wuling asked in a low voice. Chapter 1198. Shu Lizzie chuckled. We're all grown up now. We don't look like we did in the past, and this is the Dou faction's territory anyway. Tang Wuling released him and smiled as he said, let's go. Shu Lizzie and New Zealand weren't all that noteworthy, and the Spirit Pagoda and Holy Spirit cult didn't even know of their existence. It could be argued that even Tang Wuling himself was just being overly cautious as there weren't actually that many people who knew of him, either. After taking the two of them to the corner that he had been standing in before, he couldn't help but look at them with an irrepressible smile on his face. Where's everyone else, Captain? Ye Zingland still preferred to refer to him as Captain. Zheng Yu has already arrived, but I don't know where he is right now. Otherwise, I would have brought him along. All 3 of them were filled with genuine excitement upon their reunion. Congratulations on winning the competition, Ye Zingland said with a smile. Only in the company of her close friends did her cold facade ever fade. Tang Wuling chuckled. I was pretty lucky, especially in the mecha battle discipline. Ye Zingland asked, are you really planning to take mecha piloting seriously? Tang Wuling nodded in response. I think mechas are very important. Battle armor is superior in many regards, but it still can't replace mechas altogether. The best way to proceed is to use both at once, which will significantly improve both battle stamina and overall defensive prowess. Mechas are like exoskeletons with boundless potential. Modern technology is all geared towards space exploration. It's very difficult for humans to survive in space with just battle armor alone, but mechas are different. Mechas that are powerful enough can even be used in battle in outer space, so I think it's very much necessary that we pursue mechas as well. Ye Zingland's brows furrowed slightly. But won't we risk becoming jacks of all trades, masters of none? Tang Wuling smiled and said, of course that's a risk, but we're not normal people. We're Shrek 7 monsters. We just need to properly organize our priorities. In any case, there's no hurry. I'll get everyone's suits of 3-word battle armor finished first. As for mechas, we have more than enough time. I'll custom make a mecha for everyone so all of you can practice. All right. Ye Zingland was obsessed with her sword, but it definitely wasn't a single-minded obsession. In particular, she had been truly swayed when Tang Wuling had mentioned outer space. Tang Wuling turned to Shu Lizzie with a smile and asked, are you looking forward to this? With a mecha, you'll also possess practical combat prowess. I'll custom make your mecha first. Hee hee. Shu Lizzie chuckled as a smug look flashed through his eyes. Tang Wuling had known him for such a long time, so he was naturally very familiar with Shu Lizzie's facial expressions. As such, his heart stirred slightly, and he asked, have you already cultivated some kind of practical combat ability? Shu Lizzie nodded in response. It's basically complete. I can show you later. Sure. Tang Wuling couldn't help but smile at the sight of his confident expression. Shu Lizzie had a vast abundance of soul power, but due to the nature of his martial soul, he had always been focused on a limited scope in his cultivation. Among Shrek's 7 monsters, he was definitely the one with the greatest understanding of the mysterious heaven method. Tang Wuling couldn't help but wonder what other practical combat skills he had learned aside from the Tang Sect techniques. All of a sudden, Tang Wuling's soul communicator began to ring. Zheng Yu, where did you go? Where are you, boss? Tang Wuling and Yue Zhenyu both spoke almost in unison from the 2 ends of the line. I'm at the train station. Zingland and Lizzie just arrived. What about you? Tang Wuling asked. Are you at the station exit? Wait for me. Yue Hengyu abruptly ended the call there. I have no idea what's going on with him. Tang Wuling chuckled. A smile also appeared on Yu Xinglin's face. Is he still just as scatterbrained as ever? I heard from Xiaoan that he cultivated like a madman after being inspired by you. Tang Wuling nodded in response. He's improved significantly, and he's even mastered his Holy Angel clan's Holy Fusion technique. It's said that very few people in his clan master that technique, and he's already been unofficially deemed to be the successor to his grandpa as commander of the Southern Legion. What about you? How is your sword soul going? Ever since Yu Xinglin had lost to Sima Jinkai, she had been cultivating in seclusion the entire time, so Tang Wuling hadn't had a chance to ask about how her cultivation had been progressing. It's going pretty well. Yu Xinglin replied with a nod. Tang Wuling smiled and said, do you still recall the wild Gale Saber demon? He's here in Heaven Dou City. Yu Xinglin's eyes immediately lit up in response, and it seemed that she had been struck by a slightly impulsive urge. He's here as well? That's right. He came here with me. They were waiting for the others anyway, so Tang Wuling gave the two of them a recount of how Sima Jinkai and Araheng had traveled to the Blood God Legion to find him. By the time he was finished with his story, Xu Lizzie was doubled over with laughter, and Yu Xinglin was also quite amused. These were two of the brightest stars of the youngest generation, yet they had almost been executed at the Blood God Legion. It was truly quite a comical story. Captain, if it's not too much trouble, I want to face Sima Jinkai again, Yu Xinglin said in an earnest manner. Well, Tang Wuling hesitated momentarily upon hearing this. Tang Wuling would have naturally had no objections prior to Sima Jinkai's breakthrough, but now, he had become a titled Douluo infused as one with his dragon-slaying saber, thereby resulting in a massive power boost. Furthermore, he had also taken a step toward becoming the saber god, albeit only a very minor one, so he was far more powerful than before. He's already progressed to the titled Douluo stage, and he's truly become far more powerful than in the past. He's already risen beyond the realm of the saber soul, Tang Wuling said in a truthful manner. To his surprise, not only was Yu Xinglin not disheartened by his euphemistic warning, her eyes lit up even further. That's great. That's the type of opponent I want to face. Captain, please arrange a rematch for us. Tang Wuling gave her a meaningful glance before nodding in response. All right, then. Sima Jinkai was also one of his friends now and also had a profound connection with him. He was sure that Sima Jinkai wouldn't hurt Yu Xinglin. Haha, long time no see, everyone. Yue Hengyu's excited voice suddenly sounded behind him. You sure got here quickly, Tang Wuling said as he turned around. But not only was Yue Hengyu approaching him from behind, there was also someone else with him. Captain. Xu Xiaoan dove into Tang Wuling's arms and gave him a huge hug. That's right, Yue Hengyu had disappeared as he had come to the train station to pick up Xu Xiaoan. Xu Xiaoan knew Tang Wuling even before meeting Yue Hengyu. She and Xi, as well as Gu Yue, were Tang Wuling's earliest childhood friends. As such, she was naturally very excited to see Tang Wuling again after being separated for so long. Tang Wuling patted Xu Xiaoan's back, and he felt as if a warm stream were flowing through his heart. Welcome back, Xiaoan. Xu Xiaoan had already broken down into sobs. Captain, can we never separate again? Oi, oi. Your boyfriend is right here. Can't you have some restraint? Yue Hengyu complained as he glowered at Tang Wuling in case he did anything out of line. Xu Xiaoan blushed as she released Tang Wuling, then stomped on Yue Hengyu's foot and ground her heel in a vicious manner. Why did you have to ruin that good atmosphere? A dejected look appeared on Yue Hengyu's face. After we've been apart for so long, you only gave me a kiss, but you had him for so long. Can't I be jealous? Who kissed you? Xu Xiaoan blushed even further, yet before she could say anything else, she was dragged away by Yu Xinglin, and the two sisters also shared an exciting reunion of their own. Aren't you developing a little too well, Lizzie? How are you still growing even after turning 20? Yue Zheng appraised Xu Lizzie with a stunned look in his eyes. Xu Lizzie chuckled. I can't help it. I was fed really well. As a food system soulmaster, eating is a part of my cultivation, and the Legion was constantly sourcing good food for me, so I became like this. He was even more cherished and revered than Yu Xinglin in the Legion. As the Legion's #1 food system soulmaster, he was treated like a true VIP. With all of the delicious and highly nutritious foods provided to him, it seemed as if he had truly undergone a second round of puberty. Yue Zheng patted his stomach and asked, "You're a soul sage as well now, right? What's your steamed bun martial soul true body like? Can you give me a taste?" Xu Lizzie chuckled. My martial soul true body is rather special. You wouldn't want to taste it. Oh. Both Yue Hengyu and Tang Wuling were surprised to hear this. Xu Lizzie smiled and said, "This isn't a suitable place to show you my martial soul true body. I'll show you when we get back." All right, then. So all we're waiting for are Shishi and Yuanan. Where are they? They're sure taking their sweet time. Yue Hengyu was in a very excited mood. Indeed, Yuan Yui and Shishi were the only two members of Shrek's 7 monsters who still hadn't turned up yet. Chapter 1199. Some people just can't seem to kick the habit of speaking badly about others behind their backs. People like that really should take a good look at themselves. A resentful voice suddenly rang out. Surprised expressions appeared on everyone's faces upon hearing this voice, and even Tang Wuling couldn't identify the source of the voice. Shishi? Yue Hengyu faltered momentarily before an ecstatic look appeared on his face, and he urged, "Hurry up and show yourself. We're not playing hide and seek here. How about you find me if you can?" Shishi chuckled. Yue Hengyu listened to his voice while inspecting his surroundings, and even though the voice seemed to be coming from right beside him, he couldn't see any trace of Shishi nearby. What was going on? What kind of ability was this? Was it voice transmission? That couldn't be the case. Not everyone could hear a voice transmission. Right this moment, a faint smile appeared on Tang Wuling's face, and he suddenly reached out. His hand then vanished into thin air right before everyone's bewildered eyes. Whoa. In the next instant, he dragged a person out of space. This was a handsome young man in a set of black activewear. It was none other than Shishi. That's impossible. How did you find me, boss? Shishi immediately exclaimed in an incredulous manner. Tang Wuling was also appraising him with surprise in his eyes. You've really outdone yourself, Shishi. When did you attain spatial abilities? No one else was able to find Shishi, but with his spirit domain realm spiritual power, Tang Wuling was able to detect something amiss. When Shishi spoke for the second time, Tang Wuling could clearly sense spatial fluctuations surging through the air. With his spiritual power, he was able to directly control the spatial elements in the surrounding area, and even though he was unable to capture Shishi, it was quite a simple task for him to track Shishi down. On top of that, Shishi had thought that no one would be able to find him, so he was caught completely off guard. After a brief moment of surprise, a smug look immediately appeared on Shishi's face. That's a secret. I'll tell you about it later. I'm sure none of you here is a match for me now aside from boss. Oh, and aside from Yuanan as well. Tang Wuling asked, "Why are you by yourself? Where's Yuanan?" Shishi looked around before focusing his gaze in a certain direction. There she is. Everyone turned toward that direction to find that Yuanan was in her usual nondescript male disguise, and at this point, she had already caught sight of everyone else and was rushing toward them with a smile on her face. In that instant, Shrek's 7 monsters finally reunited in Heaven Dou City. Shishi's spatial abilities and Yuanan Yui's divine cloud vortex fists had both been attained during the time everyone had been apart. It hadn't been a long time since they had all joined the army, but the destruction of Shrek Academy had weighed extremely heavily on them. This pressure and burden became motivation for them to constantly improve, which was why all of them had made their own breakthroughs. They were truly deserving of their title as Shrek's 7 monsters. Instead of taking everyone back to the Tang sect right away, Tang Wuling led them into a secluded alley and applied simple disguises to them. They were Shrek's 7 monsters, after all, so there were definitely portraits of them on record both in the Spirit Pagoda and the Holy Spirit cult. A group of 7 was rather unusual to begin with, and if most of them weren't in disguise, then there was a chance that they could be caught. After applying simple disguises, everyone looked a lot more ordinary, but the irrepressible excitement in their eyes was still quite apparent. Where are we going now? Xu Xiaoan asked. Tang Wuling turned to Yue Hengyu. You didn't tell her. Yue Hengyu chuckled. I was given a massive shock, so I can't let them miss out on such a fantastic experience. I haven't told a single soul. Tang Wuling chuckled. All right, let's go. Then, follow me. Everyone was quite perplexed by this conversation. Yu Xinglin was a steadfast woman of few words, and Xu Lizzie had quite a nonchalant personality, so neither of them were all that eager to ask questions. Yuan and Yui also had a similar personality to Yu Xinglin, but Xu Xiaoan and Shishi were completely different. Both of them had very strong senses of curiosity, and they were very eager to get to the bottom of things. What's going on, boss? She was trying to get an answer out of Tang Wuling. As for Xu Xiaoan, she was exploring an alternative avenue. She was pinching Yue Zhengyu's waist in a vicious manner while appraising him with a threatening look in her eyes, clearly trying to force him into revealing the nature of the situation to her. An indignant look appeared on Yue Zhengyu's face. I would tell you, but boss won't let me. We have to listen to our captain, right? Tang Wuling smiled and said, it's good news. You'll know once you get there. Besides, this is something that is to be seen to be believed. Everyone became even more curious upon hearing this, and even Yu Xinglan was praising Tang Wuling with a slightly peculiar expression. Yue Zhenyu quickly changed the subject as he turned to Shishi and asked, what was that ability of yours? How were you able to hide in thin air? You couldn't do that before. Shishi replied in a smug manner, you're keeping secrets from us, so why should I tell you anything? Yue Zhenyu pursed his lips in a disdainful manner. You're telling me you developed some kind of secret technique? What a joke. Shishi raised an eyebrow in response. How about you fight me one-on-one, then? I'll have you rolling on the ground in seconds. Yue Zhenyu burst into derisive laughter. You think you have what it takes? Can both of you shut up? We've been apart for so long, yet the first thing you do after our reunion is fight. Yuan and Yui grumbled. Shishi immediately put on a fawning smile. We're not fighting. I wouldn't fight a little kid who doesn't know any better. What did you call me? Yue Zhenyu immediately flared up with rage. Tang Wuling led from the front, and for some reason, his heart was filled with warmth as he listened to his friends bigger behind him. He really liked this feeling of having his friends back by his side. After turning onto the main street, Yue Zhenyu and Shishi finally called a truce in their war of words. After all, a busy street like this one was where they were most prone to having their covers blown, so it was best not to attract any attention. Shishi was holding Yuan and Yui's hand, and the two of them were conversing quietly, while Yu Xinglan and Xu Lizhi were also walking hand in hand. On this occasion, Tang Wuling chose a different route compared to the one he had taken Yue Zhenyu on. They entered a private residence before making their way into the basement, where there was an elevator waiting for them. Where are we going? Shishi looked around at the simple metal wall of the elevator in a bewildered manner. He didn't recall there being a base like this one in Heaven Dou City. Everyone else was also quite surprised. They had thought that they would be taken to a hotel. The Tang sect. Tang Wuling replied in a concise manner to dispel everyone's befuddlement. An enlightened look immediately appeared on Shishi's face, and he thought he had figured everything out. I get it now. The surprise is the Tang sect, right, boss? Looks like the Tang sect must still have a lot of power hidden up their sleeve. With their help, everything will become a lot easier for us in the future. By the way, what are our future plans, boss? Tang Wuling glanced at him with a smile and said, I'll tell you when we get there. Shishi was rather displeased. We're all close friends. Why are you being so secretive? Tang Wuling chuckled. I'm afraid you might cry if I tell you everything. Cry? Me? How could I possibly cry? I have a heart of steel. Shishi said in a nonchalant manner, I didn't even cry when the academy was bombed. Yue Zhenyu pursed his lips. You were probably scared shitless. Ding. The elevator stopped in its descent, and its metal doors parted. Shishi said, let's see what this secret Tang sect base has in store that'll to make me cry. Chapter 1200. Shishi was the first one to emerge from the elevator. Let's see what this secret Tang sect base has in store that'll to make me cry. All of a sudden, his voice abruptly cut off, and his entire body stiffened as he was rooted to the spot. Yuan and Yui was behind him, but she was slightly shorter than him, so she couldn't see what lay up ahead. However, she could naturally sense that there was something amiss from Shishi's reaction, and she hurriedly tried to go around him. It was also right at this moment that Shishi let loose an incredulous howl. Teacher Wu. He then rushed forward like the wind. Wu Zhangkong's facial features were still as cold as ever, but his eyes were filled with a gentle light. He had been waiting patiently for their return, and when Shishi caught sight of him for the first time, he couldn't believe his own eyes. His heart was then instantly overcome by irrepressible emotions. It was just as Yue Zhenyu had said. Everyone had truly been scared witless in the wake of the Shrek Academy bombing, to the extent that their minds had gone completely blank, and they had been incapable of expressing their emotions. However, as time passed, the pain naturally caught up to them. All of their peers at Shrek Academy and even Teacher Wu perished during that calamitous disaster, and the pain in their hearts remained fresh to this very day. Never did Shishi think that he would be able to see Wu Zhangkong again, and all of his pent-up emotions immediately erupted forth uncontrollably. He charged directly toward Wu Zhangkong before rushing into his arms and bawling at the top of his lungs. Meanwhile, Xu Xiaoan, Xu Lizhi, Yuan and Yui, and Yu Xinglan were also rooted to the spot. Teacher Wu was still alive. Xu Xiaoan had been a student of Wu Zhangkong ever since she was a small child, so they shared an extremely deep bond, and she also let loose a shrill shriek before rushing forward. Thus, the sound of broken sobs echoed throughout the entrance to the elevator. Yue Zhenyu nudged Tang Wuling and asked, did we go too far, boss? What if they recover later on and decide to blame us for not telling them everything in advance? Us? What do you mean us? My girlfriend isn't here. Tang Wuling replied in a nonchalant manner. Boss, you can't do this to me. Yue Zhenyu howled in anguish, thinking back to Xu Xiaoan's threatening gaze. Chills immediately ran down his back. Hee. Tang Wuling paid no heed to him and hurried forward to join the huddle. What could make one more excited and elated than a reunion following an ordeal of life and death? Even Wu Zhangkong had tears in his eyes. Being reunited with everyone had evoked within him emotions that he hadn't felt for a very long time. All right, everyone, let's all calm down a little. Only after a long while did Tang Wuling begin to console his friends. The one who was crying the loudest was Shishi. Perhaps it was because he was the first one to have caught sight of Wu Zhangkong, but he simply couldn't stop his tears. Yue Zhenyu nudged him with a hint of mockery in his eyes. What was that about a heart of steel? Shishi turned to glare at him through a film of tears. I was wrong. So what? If Teacher Wu can come back to life, I'd gladly be proven wrong countless times. All of a sudden, a thought occurred to him, and he abruptly stood up straight as he looked at Wu Zhangkong, then turned toward Tang Wuling. You're not pranking us, are you, boss? Is this someone else disguised as Teacher Wu? They had all learned disguise techniques on the demonic island, and Tang Wuling was the most adept in those techniques among them. As long as he could find someone of a similar stature and build, he could make an extremely convincing imposter for Wu Zhangkong. A resigned look appeared on Tang Wuling's face. I can disguise someone to look like Teacher Wu, but how can I replicate his aura as well? It's not an imposter. You can't replicate Teacher Wu's eyes. Xu Xiaoan yelled as she pinched Yue Zhenyu's waist in a vicious manner. Her eyes were also filled with tears of excitement. Wu Zhangkong was Tang Wuling's childhood idol, and that applied to her and Shishi as well. What's going on? Xu Lizhi couldn't help but ask with an elated look on his face. Tang Wuling smiled, and right at this moment, one figure after another emerged from nearby. Wu Sichuo, Xu Yucheng, Luo Qixing, Zheng Yuren, Yang Niangsha. My god, all of you are still alive? Everyone's emotions were reignited at the sight of them. They had once been rivals, but ever since they had entered the inner court, their relationship had improved significantly. After all, they were all from the most exceptional class 1. Wu Zhangkong smiled and said, if we hadn't heard that you were all coming back, I would have left with them already. I can finally rest easy now that I've seen all of you for myself. It had been a very long time since Wu Zhangkong had been in such a good mood. These disciples of his were all far more exceptional than him. They were only in their early 20s, yet all of them had reached the soul sage level with the exception of Zheng Yuren. This was an extraordinary cohort even in Shrek Academy. Furthermore, they had all been nurtured by him. What could be more exciting to him than this as a teacher? You're all going somewhere. Where are you going? Shishi asked in a curious manner. Tang Wuling glanced at Shishi and replied in their stead, they're going to military training. You know, to the place that we went to before. Peculiar expressions appeared on all of Shrek's 7 monsters' faces, mirroring the expressions on the faces of their inner court seniors back when they had set off for their military training stint. They were undoubtedly going to the demonic island. That place was surely going to leave them with many lasting memories. Oh, that's great. I'm sure you'll enjoy it, Yue Zhenyu said with a sly smirk. Wu Sijuo and the others glanced at one another at the sight of their expressions, and Yang Niangsha asked, what is this place? Why do I feel so uneasy when I look at all of you? Xu Lizhi put on a serious expression. Don't be uneasy, you're going to a good place. Just trust us. Can't you see how quickly we've grown? It's all because of that special military training. Perhaps you'll have caught up to us by the time you get back from there. Wu Sijuo glanced at them and said, no matter how arduous the training is going to be, we'll complete it as soon as possible so we can come back and rebuild Shrek Academy with everyone. Tang Wuling nodded with a smile. Wu Zhangkong said, take them to rest now. Pavilion Master, I also have to prepare to set off with Wu Sijuo and the others. For the first group, we selected 12 people. That's the upper limit for the number of people they can accept at a time. All right. Tang Wuling nodded in response. He respected Wu Zhangkong as his teacher, but he was currently the Sea God's Pavilion Master and the Tang Sect's master, so he couldn't act as respectfully as he did in the past. Pavilion Master? All of Shrek's 7 monsters turned to Tang Wuling with surprised expressions with the exception of Yue Zhangyu. Wu Zhangkong explained, the Academy's rebuilding process has already commenced, and the outer and inner courts have been established. Wuling is now the Sea God's Pavilion Master, and all of you are elders of the Sea God's Pavilion as well. A surprised yet solemn expression appeared on the faces of Shrek's 7 monsters upon hearing this. The rebuilding process had already commenced, and they had become elders at such a young age. The future rebuilding process was definitely going to be an extremely arduous one, but they had to face forward with a positive mindset no matter what. Yue Zhangyu smiled, and said, that's not the end. They're not the only survivors. Yue Zhangyu was being crucified by Xu Xiaolan's vicious pinching techniques, and he didn't dare to withhold any more information. An hour later, all of Shrek's 7 monsters were taken to their rooms, and aside from Tang Wuling and Yue Zhangyu, everyone felt as if they were still in a dream. So many of their junior disciple sisters and junior disciple brothers of the outer court had survived, as well as their peers of the inner court. Even Elder Long had survived. Could there be any better news than this? Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.